In today's video, we're going to be talking about South American cichlids and some really cool stocking ideas for your own tank setups with these different types of cichlids. There is a wide variety of South American cichlids and combinations of these fish that you could put together. Some of my favorite all-time fish are South American cichlids, so I love any excuse to talk about them, so let's dive right in. So there are many different types of South American cichlids, from your really big ones to some of your smaller dwarf species. And some of these fish can go together, some can't. Some are more aggressive or peaceful. Some could be in planted aquariums and some would just destroy all plants. I'm looking at you, Severums. But in today's video, I'm going to be walking through 7 different stocking options when it comes to these South American cichlids and how you can kind of formulate this for yourself, including some general parameters when it comes to tank size and setup, and just which of these fish work well together. And another thing to keep in mind about this list is that it really is focused on South American cichlids, so even though you can mix South American cichlids with select African cichlids or even Central American cichlids, and that's really common in the hobby today, this list is really going to be focused on a South American theme, and that's why there are only 7 options and why you're only going to see fish from South America on this list. And this list isn't really in order of our favorites, just more so different topics that you can find within the South American cichlid category. And so without further ado, let's get into the first setup option. So the first option here is actually centered around maybe the most popular cichlid in the hobby today, and that is the Oscar. This guy right here is always front and center in my aquarium, and I just absolutely love Oscars because they have a huge personality. They come in a lot of different color variations, and their massive size is just awesome. But Oscars can be pretty aggressive, especially if their tank is too small or if their tank mates aren't ideal. If you're looking to make an Oscar tank, it's really something you should plan out beforehand. If you want to just keep one solo adult Oscar, a 75-gallon tank is probably the bare minimum. But if you want to add tank mates with your Oscar, like maybe another Oscar or two, a 125 is probably the new minimum tank size you should aim for. But once you get into that 125 to 180 gallon tank range, your tank mate options really start to open up with your Oscar. With a tank in this range, you could start looking into chocolate cichlids, for instance, or true parrot cichlids. Severum cichlids are great choices, silver dollars even. Green terrors are a maybe, but they can be hit or miss with aggression levels. All of these fish can get big enough that they should hold their own, but not be too aggressive to harm your Oscar in a tank of this size. But you could also look at medium-sized cichlids that are more on the peaceful end, but most of these need time to grow before you add the Oscar. I let my Geophagus, Severums, Electric Blue Acara in this tank all grow up for about 1.5 years before I introduced the Oscar as a juvenile, and the Oscar has already grown way past them in size, but it was totally necessary for this tank to work. If I had added them all as juveniles at the same time, the Oscar would have outgrown them in no time and caused a lot of issues. They probably would have been big enough to eat all the other fish in the tank. But since these fish are more peaceful than some of the other cichlid options, they didn't mind the smaller Oscar when it was introduced, and it all worked out according to plan. Lastly, if you have a really big tank and you still want the Oscar to be the focal point, you could just get a larger school of Oscars, or even look into things like an arowana, pike cichlids, bichers, or even stingrays. Just make sure you have a massive tank to keep them all. Oscars are amazing cichlids, and I can clearly talk about them all day. The main piece of advice for an Oscar tank is to just give them enough space. Trying to do the bare minimum tank size with an Oscar will usually lead to issues if you're keeping them with tank mates, and so I would just recommend the larger the tank, the better with an Oscar. Speaking of a topic that I bring up a lot on this channel is one of my favorite trios of cichlids, that is the Severum, Electric Blue Acara, and Geophagus. These guys are perfect tank mates and give you a wide range of behavior, size, and colors in your aquarium. Severums are my favorite cichlids, and they can grow to a really good size and have many different color variations to choose from. And out of this trio, they'll get the largest, and you'll probably need a 75-gallon tank for this combo. But Geophagus species have really great color and fin extensions if you're patient enough to let them grow out. Geos will sift through the sand looking for uneaten food and keeping that substrate spotless. They'll be at the bottom of the tank while the Severums are slowly swimming around all over. And then you have the Electric Blue Acaras, which would be the extra active swimmers in this group, as they go back and forth in your tank quite a bit, and they also provide a huge contrast in color to the Severums and Geos. That difference in size, color patterns, and behaviors really makes this trio the best group of tank mates when it comes to South American cichlids, in my opinion. And in a 75-gallon tank, I'd maybe do just one Severum, maybe 1 to 2 electric blue Acaras, and 2 to 5 Geos depending on the species. If you have a larger tank, you could easily bump those numbers up and it would make for a really great option. So we just discussed a few options for larger tank setups with South American cichlids, but what if you don't have a really large tank? There are actually some really great options out there for small community tanks. Apistogramma or rams would do great in a 20 or a 29-gallon tank. You could even add in some tetras, bristlenose plecos, or corridoras to that setup and have a nice little community. This would also be a great stocking for a small planted tank, as these fish won't destroy the plants and they actually prefer that extra cover. If you want to grow this type of setup into a 40 or a 55-gallon, you could keep that same stocking of apistos and rams and others, but then add in a few other cichlids like maybe a keyhole cichlid, a festivum would be great, or even the curviceps. All of these fish stay relatively peaceful, do well with planted tanks, and they won't harm smaller fish in the tank. It's a really peaceful, calm setup and some of the best cichlids you can keep in a planted tank. And speaking of planted tanks, another cichlid that would be a perfect centerpiece would be the angelfish, one of these guys right here, but you could keep them in a smaller tank than my 150 and just make the tank about the angel. Angelfish are South American cichlids that are very popular and easy to care for. I love 55-gallon tanks for angels because they utilize that full space, and they are tall fish, so they fit the dimensions of a 55 perfectly. In a 55-gallon, you could do a handful of angelfish, maybe do a school of tetras that aren't too fin nippy, and then even add a few of the smaller cichlids we just talked about, like the ram or the apisto. Angels look especially nice in a planted aquarium, in my opinion, and they slowly swim back and forth into the tank and come in many different varieties and color patterns. And if you add some of those tank mates, which will likely stay at the bottom third of the aquarium, it makes for a really nice balance and kind of covers all aspects of the tank. I did a full video on tank mates for the angelfish, which I'll leave down in the description, along with a few other relevant videos coming out of this topic. Discus are arguably the most beautiful cichlids in the hobby today, or just the most beautiful fish in general. They just require a bit more thought and care than the others on this list, but a lot of what I just said about the angelfish tank could be said about the discus as well. Just swap in the discus instead and you'd likely be okay, as long as any tank mates are okay with higher temperatures. One of the main differences for discus is that they like warmer water, anywhere from 82 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, which can sometimes be hard on other fish or plants if it's consistently that warm. However, there are some awesome combinations you could do with discus. The first option would be discus only. I'd say a 55-gallon tank is probably the minimum tank size for adults. If you have a 75 or 90-gallon, anywhere from 5 to 8 discus would probably work well. If you have a 125, you could add a few more, and so on. Some people will keep bare-bottom tanks with discus so that they can keep it super clean. I don't totally love that type of setup unless I'm trying to breed fish, so I would recommend some hardy plants like Anubias and Java fern, sand substrate, driftwood, and rocks. The plants will keep nitrates low and your discus healthy. But a few tank mate options would be schooling fish like rummy nose or cardinal tetras. Corridoras are great bottom dwellers, and even some plecos could go well with discus. German blue rams and angelfish are probably the best cichlids to keep with the discus, but sometimes when I'm keeping discus, I just like them to be the centerpiece, you know? Maybe the most unique South American cichlid setup on this list wouldn't even require a heater, and that would be a Geophagus species. This is a subcategory of Geophagus from southern regions of South America, where temps get very cold during the winters, and due to this, they like fluctuations in temperatures and actually prefer colder periods. There are a handful of species to pick from, with a couple species being great for a 40-gallon tank, and some getting slightly bigger and requiring a 55 or a 75-gallon. I recently did a full deep dive into this species, which I'll leave in the description below as well. My favorite centerpiece is probably the Balzani, but I've really come to love the Terra purpura in my 40-gallon breeder as well. It's just a really cool, unique option if you're trying to keep a region-specific tank of South America. It's always fun to breed fish, so you could do a breeding pair, and this could be a wide range of tank sizes depending on your pair of cichlids. You could do as small as a 10-gallon tank if you're just breeding apistogrammas or Bolivian rams, maybe a 40-gallon breeder for Severums, electric blue acara, or Geophagus pairs. A 75-gallon would maybe work for 2 green terrors. That would be an awesome setup. A red terror or some of your larger South Americans could probably do a 75 to 90-gallon range, but the larger the better. I just recommend having a plan for potential fry, whether that's a local store or friends that they can take them off of you. I'm still overrun by electric blue acaras, but hey, I'm not complaining. You could always trim down the breeding pair to just keep a solo pet fish, like the Oscar in the 75-gallon tank that we mentioned earlier, a single red terror in a 90-gallon or a 125. A solo male apistogramma would be great for a 15 to 20-gallon. It's really cool to have that community for sure, but sometimes the interaction you get from a solo pet fish is just as cool. Okay, so that does it for our list for stocking ideas for South American cichlids specifically. If you have any questions, make sure to leave those down in the description below, or if you'd like to see a similar list done on Central Americans or even African cichlids, let us know down in the comments. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.